In the next few days, we will have extra support and opportunities to really evaluate the injuries we have to our identity and our negative beliefs about what we are really capable of building and being in the world, as well as where our worthiness actually comes from. On Sunday, May 10th, the Sun in Taurus sextiles Jupiter in Cancer. And on Tuesday, the 12th, Mercury in Taurus also sextiles Jupiter in Cancer. So the Sun often gets reduced down to words like ego and identity, but I find it most useful to remember that the Sun represents the ideal image that we have for ourselves and our purpose and mission on the planet. And Mercury, of course, the messenger, Hermes, of thoughts and ideas, both wanted and unwanted, conscious and unconscious, intrusive and unhelpful, perhaps, or creative and helpful. And the sextile energy to Jupiter, which, by the way, still has a few months left to go in the feminine moon sign of Cancer as it's finishing its year-long sojourn there, it's a special opportunity that we can take or we can miss out on as Mercury prepares for its Cazimi moment, where it makes a conjunction to the Sun in just a couple days later and undergoes a very powerful transformation into the next year and synodic cycle. So under these Sunday and Tuesday transits, Mercury is getting closer and closer to the Sun in what we call combustion, and that makes it difficult to express itself powerfully. But the sextile to Jupiter is the opportunity to draw on that energy of teacher, of inner guru, inner wisdom, as well as our ability to see where our mental habits are harming us instead of serving us or even protecting us, which is Jupiter's goal. If we take these next few days to examine why our constant striving, achievements, fame, power, money, status, why all that can still often leave us feeling inadequate, broken, lost and confused, or just inferior in some way, we can really make the most of Mercury's rebirth after its powerful conversation with the Sun next Thursday. Hi, I'm Mimi Rose White. I'm an integrative psychotherapist. I've been doing that for almost 20 years. And I'm also an astrologer, making videos on concrete self-healing tools and concepts that align with the current astrology. Be sure and check out the link in my description below to go to my website and access any of my free resources. So, as I'm sure you're already aware of, one of the cruelest ironies around achievement, or what we might define as success, is that it just so often leaves us still feeling unfulfilled and not good enough. And I could speak for many hours about why I think that is. But what I think is most important to notice right now is the places and parts of us that tend to get loud about our perceived flaws, about what we're still not doing enough of, where we could improve, no matter how hard we strive. I hear a lot from parents and mothers, particularly in my practice, who have young children. They feel stretched in a million different directions. And no matter how hard they try, they end up repeating a really familiar narrative in their mind, a familiar mental narrative of, I'm a bad mom, I should be enjoying this more, or what's wrong with me that my child prefers his dad at the end of the day after all that I've been doing for them. Or for people who don't have kids, I often hear, I should be doing more with my career, I should be somewhere that I'm not, I should be where X, Y, and Z competitor or colleague from university is. So these are all really normal questions and dilemmas that we grapple with, especially if you're a parent, I think, but they tend to bring us back to really the age-old question of how and from where is a person's worth derived. The Sun in astrology is the plot line of our life. It represents our intentions, our ambitions, our motivations, and that action of the soul towards that ideal. So there's always going to be this constant tension towards that we experience throughout the lifetime. And I think that's really inherent to being human. But as we strive for that ideal image, we must remember this just kind of intractable truth that that ideal is an unachievable goal. And attention towards the desire for that and the limitations inherent in being alive will always be present, that tension, no matter who we are. So I often ask my clients to envision someone they love or a child in their life or even their own children as an infant when they were newly born or adopted. And I ask them if that baby needed to do anything to be lovable and to be worthy of care, tender loving care, adoration, and protection. And of course, most people will immediately answer no, that baby has inherent worth. And if you ask someone why that is, they usually just say, well, it just is, or I don't know, or it's just something I feel, or I know deep down. And part of our work on the spiritual path and healing path, healing from trauma, recovery from abuse, addiction, etc. The primary part of that work is to reconnect to the infant within us that was perfect and deserving of time, attention, presence, and utter adoration before we were wired with all this conditioning that we were wrong, bad, and not good enough. And honestly, those beliefs are almost impossible to avoid, even in the most attentive, attuned, caring parent or caregiver situation. All of those people, including myself, will at some point, if not often, translate to the child the idea that they are bad and wrong, not because we've actually ever said that. You don't have to have experienced abuse to have that core belief somewhere in your psyche, but because we tend to automatically withdraw connection and love when we're disappointed, upset, frustrated, overwhelmed, tired. It might even just be like a look on our face. And the child in its egocentric state has only one conclusion to draw: that if love is being withheld or withdrawn, it's because of something wrong with them. And I think that early shame wound is the origin of that shame wound is at the root of why, no matter how many achievements we accomplish, that original perception and consequent belief that there's something not quite enough about us, or we wouldn't feel pain, we wouldn't feel loss, we wouldn't experience the rejection of love or attention. We wouldn't disappoint the people that love us, that we were so completely dependent on for survival. That self-blame and the feelings of inferiority, like we're not being enough, actually gives us a sense of control when we're little. Because if that's true, which it's not, if it's true, then if we just tried harder, if we did more, maybe mom wouldn't be angry at us at the end of the day. Or dad wouldn't drink alone in his room when we went to play and bark at us to leave him alone. Or your brother wouldn't have left home when you were little. I mean, it goes on and on and on, because these are the conclusions we draw as children. And they unconsciously, although they harm us, ultimately, they unconsciously give us a sense of control over a life that we have very little control over and virtually no decision-making power in. So worthiness and self-love, inherent lovability, actually feeling like we're enough, regardless of any kind of accomplishment, or just for getting out of bed in the morning, the ability to feel like that we are just enough and we are worthy inherently, is a skill that actually comes with practice. And it's what we call in mental health a new internal working model. And with effort, it can be developed. And I would argue that divine intervention often plays a spiritual hand, which is why it's so important to understand how the astrology supports turning the tide of these negative cognitive beliefs that we have, and subsequent following behaviors of just keep going and going and going and working and working and working just to feel the same about ourselves at the end of the day. So what does it look like to reprogram our minds and change our beliefs around where our worthiness comes from? A lot of people associate that with Taurus, and I think that that's more about because Taurus is, what we feel secure, what we need to feel secure. Sometimes that's often with Taurus because it's an earth sign, physical things around us, but it's also the sense of how our resources help us feel safe in the world, internal resources and external resources. In the Vedic tradition, the concept of the self, the true self, or Atman, universal self, what we might call the wise mind in the West, is divine and it is eternal. And it's part of the ultimate reality, which is also called Brahman in that tradition. And in that philosophy, the goal is to realize the unity of the self with that ultimate reality, the unity of Atman with Brahman. And in that tradition, this leads us to liberation or moksha from the cycle of death, rebirth, and karma. And as I'm sure you know, one of the primary practices of connecting to that unity that we become separated from through our life experiences and conditioning in the East is meditation. Sitting in stillness, focusing on the breath, focusing on the third eye, asking for divine help, sitting next to an image of a teacher, guru, or great being. These are practices that have been used by millions of people over centuries, myself included, as a vehicle for awakening to that inner sense of wholeness, of worthiness, of sublimity. But in a more practical sense that might feel more accessible to people is to identify what practices we would engage in if we knew we were worthy, as a newborn baby is. Would we work 12 hours a day and never take a vacation? Would we neglect our teeth or our hygiene? Would we give to everyone else and not ourselves? Would we allow that mental voice inside to beat ourselves up all day and punish ourselves with harder workouts and restrictive diets when we don't meet a physical ideal? No, I think we can objectively argue that if we feel worthy and believe we're worthy and lovable just as we are, we probably wouldn't engage in some of those self-destructive things. And the fastest way to feel an innate sense of worthiness is to not do the thing that the part says you must do, to keep working, keep achieving, keep succeeding, keep gaining more knowledge, making more money, climbing, Saturn, climbing the mountain until your feet are bloody. We do the opposite of that with our bodies behaviorally so many times that the nervous system begins to learn it doesn't kill us. And there's actually peace and ease to be found in the other direction of what can often be an obsession for proving ourselves as good enough. When we commit to not doing those things, and I'm not talking, by the way, of like leaving your job in society or your responsibilities. I mean, obviously there are things to do and people to take care of. But when we can recognize and separate enough from the part that is driving us, beating us up, it's telling us we're just not good enough, we can engage in behaviors that ultimately our feelings and beliefs will follow from. I promise you this works, but you have to commit. I know for me, buying myself a nice pair of shoes that cost way more money than I'd ever spent before, I think they were $150, about 15 years ago, when I was newly divorced, and I've been a lifetime thrift shopper, I still am. I clearly prefer vintage clothing, and I'm a budget shopper because it's just so much more fun. But one day I was at the Nordstrom rack and I found a pair of Sam Edelman fringe booties that I really wanted. And allowing myself to splurge on those shoes when I had literally never bought an expensive, and I know that's not super expensive, but for me it was, an expensive pair of shoes for myself in my life, was acting as though I was worthy and deserving, even though I hadn't done something spectacular to earn them. And this is kind of a silly example, but it can be that simple, all the way to starting to recognize as soon as someone is rude or raises their voice to you that you're going to walk away. That is an example of behaving as though you're worthy of being treated with kindness, dignity, and respect. So when we start to identify all the ways in which we tolerate behavior and environments that a person who knew they were worthy just for being human would not tolerate, and we start changing up our behavior around that, the feelings and the beliefs, because it's not going to feel great to do that different, weird behavior, but the feelings and the beliefs, they will follow. Now, I think for most of us, we'll always have some voices, some parts that are trying to help us through beating us up, working us to death. They go to those extreme roles from time to time. But we can learn to become friends and become curious with those parts without letting them dominate our lives. So your meditation for these next few days leading up to the Mercury Cazimi, and I'll have a special video for that and the new moon on Saturday coming up, is what is the part of me, this is the meditation, what is the part of me that tells me I'm not enough, afraid will happen if it stops doing that job for me in that way? The mirror work for this transit is, I love you just for being alive. And your mantra leading up to the end of next week is, I am as perfect and lovable as the day I was born. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for liking, subscribing, sharing, and checking out my free resources on my website linked below. Check out these videos above me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.